Okay, Chapter 2, Introduction to Cost Terms and Purposes. And in this presentation, we'll look at cost objects and then review everything about direct versus indirect costs. Okay, first, to define and illustrate a cost object, and second, to distinguish between indirect costs and direct costs. Then we'll also look at variable versus fixed. Okay, how to interpret unit costs. All right, that's always tricky when you're allocating fixed costs to it. And then finally, we end up with looking at inventoriable costs and period costs. Okay, the flow of inventory and period costs. And then finally, why product costs are computed in different ways. So here we've got some basic cost terms and their definitions, and managers use information in two main ways. Okay, when making decisions and when implementing decisions. So they'll use different terms. So you want to think of a cost as a sacrifice or foregone resource to achieve a specific objective. Actual has already occurred. Okay, budgeted is predicted. And then the cost object is whatever we want to measure, which could be a wide variety of things. Now here we are thinking about the cost of something. And it's a particular something. It could be a car, a piano, a new outfit. That thing about which we want to know the cost is called the cost object. It could be a department. It could be an entire division, and it could be something very tiny. In this slide, we've got some examples of different things about which we may want to know the costs. And it's different things. The cost of an activity, okay, the cost of a project, the cost of a customer. Okay, customers are expensive. And here we've got some additional terminology. A cost accumulation is a collection of cost data in an organized way by means of an accounting system. Cost assignment, a general term that encompasses the gathering of accumulated costs to a cost object in two ways. You either trace the cost with a direct relationship to the cost object or allocating accumulated costs with an indirect relationship to an object. Okay, so cost assignment involves tracing direct costs and indirect costs. And one way that we can differentiate between different types of costs is to identify them as direct or indirect. And direct can be conveniently and economically traced or tracked to a cost object. Okay, indirect costs cannot be conveniently or economically traced to a cost object. Instead of being traced, these costs are accumulated to a cost object in a rational and systematic manner, the best you can do. Like the salary of a plant administrator at BMW, as an example, is an indirect cost of a particular automobile because unlike the steel or the tires used, it's virtually impossible to trace the plant administrator cost to a particular car line. Okay? Now this is my favorite slide. I like this. And this is going back to the BMW example. Here we can see an illustration of how costs for that line would be collected to the cost object. If the BMW X6 is our cost object, the direct costs can be traced, but the indirect costs must be allocated. Okay, and added together, we get the total cost for the cost object. Okay, but direct are traced and indirect are allocated. This is a big effect on management. To get a better understanding of the types of items that fit into each type of cost, direct or indirect, we've got some examples here. One way to think of this is that association between the direct costs and the specific requests for those items in the production process. Okay, so we need 4 tires and so many pounds of steel for each car, but we don't requisition a number of hours of administration time, or rent on a particular line or a car. Managers are much more confident about the accuracy of direct costs, such as the cost of steel and tires, because these costs can be easily traced to the object. Indirect costs are a different story. And, we can allocate them in many different ways. You might remember some of that. Indirect costs can be assigned to cost objects with reasonable accuracy, and others are more difficult. A few factors affect the direct indirect cost allocation: the materiality of the cost in question. All right. The smaller the cost, the less likely it will be economically feasible to trace the cost, like little screws or glue. Glue is a good example. The availability of information gathering technology. Technology that makes it possible to consider more and more costs as direct. Okay, so if you've got parts with barcodes on them, those will be definitely easier to track now than they were in the past. And the design of operations. If parts of a facility are dedicated to a particular cost object, such as a specific product or a particular customer, then we're generally able to more easily classify them as direct. Okay, a specific cost may be a direct cost for one cost object and then indirect for another.